This is Chicago. At the dawn of the 21st century, Chicago's media was dominated by a handful of major corporations. But a resistance movement arose to free Chicago's media from their clutches. One player in this movement is the Chicago Independent Media Center and its TV show, Chicago Independent Television. The Independent Media Center is a worldwide network of grassroots correspondents committed to using the tools of the media for promoting social and economic justice. You are watching this month's dispatch from the Chicago Independent Media Center.
Welcome to Chicago Independent Television, a collection of progressive video reports by grassroots media workers produced free from corporate or commercial support or influence. In this episode, we'll see a segment about the prison pipeline in Illinois, and we'll see the first of a four-part series of lectures about the struggle over freedom of speech and action on the internet, a policy known as net neutrality. All that and more coming up. Stay with us.
Here at Exxon, we hate your children. We all know the climate crisis will rip their world apart, but we don't care because it's making us rich. That's right. Every year, Congress gives the fossil fuel industry over $10 billion in subsidies. That's your tax dollars lining our pockets. Making a fortune, destroying your kids' future? At Exxon, that's what we call good business. ExxonHatesYourChildren.com.
Mr. Bishop, I want to use this picture on the front page of our next issue.
Oh, come now, Nancy. We can't print a picture like that. Paper is read by people all over the city. Just think what a picture like that would do to the reputation of our newspaper.
I don't think we should hide things just because they're unpleasant. How do we stop things like this if we don't let the people know they're happening?
Members of Occupy Chicago held a Christmas celebration called Occupy Your Kids, which included food, games, art, and of course, pointed political commentary.
Welcome back to Chicago Independent Television. Here's a segment about the prison pipeline in Illinois, the injustice surrounding it, and efforts by people in Illinois to oppose it.
Again, we're here. It's a symbolic march. The school is closed. We're marching to the Juvenile Detention Center. Well, today we're talking about incarceration and schools being closed. And across the nation, there are, as a public attack, there's an attack on public education, which public education does. A lot of black youth are in public education, particularly in Chicago. And we're talking about incarceration, and what is very true is that there's an overrepresentation of black bodies in the prison system unjustly and unfairly. And so that correlates to our mission to see freedom for all people who look like me. And so that's why we're here, and that's why we're organizing.
I'm actually here supporting a lot of colleagues, friends. I'm very big on restorative justice, and so a lot of what we talked about today was about the experiences that our young people have with the justice system. We're standing behind the Juvenile Detention Center, where unfortunately a lot of our talent is locked up behind bars. We met at a closed school and walked 2.5 miles from that school to the center, symbolically to show what happens when we close schools, we open prisons. And so I'm here because restorative justice is a big part of my platform. I believe in creating accountability to the community instead of locking people up. I believe in investing in human capital. And I see especially our young people as our best asset. And so their voices were amazing, and I'm just here to support.
The action today was a symbolic action to kick off the week of action against incarcerating youth. It was also Malcolm X's birthday today. So we walked from a school that's been closed down in the Lawndale community to the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center to symbolize the school to prison pipeline and to show how our young people are being locked out of their schools and locked into prisons.
I grew up in the southwest of Chicago, and I went to CPS for both elementary school and high school. And too many times the lines were blurred between a school and a prison. We had to be humiliated once in a while with surprise searches when we were walking into school. And many times, many of our classmates did not come back from a weekend. They were either shot or arrested. And too many times, I'm 25 now, and I've been to more funerals or welcome back parties than I've been to college graduations in the last 6 years. And then what's even more shameful is that people like Barack Obama go on TV and they blame us for our quote-unquote values. But what about their values? They deported 2 million of our brothers, sisters, mothers, and parents. What are we supposed to do after they deport them? And what are we supposed to do when his administration is the one that's closing down all our schools and spending trillions of dollars killing our Palestinian, Afghani, and Iraqi brothers and sisters? And it's his administration saying that we are not good enough for the education that they are giving their children.
Part of the problem is that they go into our schools and they pick out a certain percentage of students that will be incarcerated by the time they're an adult.
Students are most important, and we need to fight for our own education. And the belittlement of students is not right, and the school to prison pipeline is the worst thing possible.
Well, some of the solutions are closed prisons, closed juvenile detention centers. Instead of sending our kids to prison, provide them with counseling, provide them with things that'll help them, have a better life instead of into a life of crime from a school that's not teaching them anything to a juvenile prison to an adult prison.
The reason why this work is important to the Alliance and my organization is because we know that although 5% of the population are students that identify as queer, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, or queer, they make up 15% of the prison systems or the criminal justice system. Similarly, right, 9 out of 10 young black men come into contact with the criminal justice system in this country. Generally, all of these identities intersect. So if you're queer identified, if you're black, and also may have like a learning disability, the likelihood that you graduate nowadays is almost none. And so you'll end up in a facility like this one, you'll end up out on the streets, you'll end up homeless. There's a huge homeless crisis in the youth queer community today. So we're out here right now saying that this is important to us. We need to take the millions of dollars that are invested in this prison system and invest it back into our children, their education, right? There are schools in Chicago that their physical education is an online course. There are things that defy logic, and so today we're saying we need to be logical about the way that we treat our children, and we need to invest in our future and right now, right? So that's why we're here today.
This is Jill Stein. You're watching Chicago Independent Television.
Chicago Independent Television presents Profiles in Cowardice with Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. At the 2012 Montrose Beach Kite Festival, held the same weekend as the 2012 NATO Summit in Chicago, and co-sponsored by the NATO Summit and by war contractor Boeing, Mayor Rahm Emanuel made an appearance, but abruptly left. Why did he leave? Was there a policy emergency? Was the Kite Festival overrun by lepers? No! Chicago's badass mayor was running away from the combined strength of 2 protesters.
Political public relations stunt, and everybody can see through it. You give kites to kids in America and drop bombs on kids in Iraq. You drop bombs on kids in Afghanistan. You drop bombs on kids that speak Arabic. No to NATO. No to the warmongers. No to Boeing. Go home. Get out of here.
You're not even from Chicago! Give us our libraries, man! Give us our mental health care facilities!
What do you have to say for yourself? can you say? Nothing! Because you're a bunch of murderers! Go home, warmonger! Go home, murderers!
We want our mental health care clinics that you're closing on us!
No more cluster bombs! No more bullying! No more hypocritical public relations stunts!
And now Rahm Emanuel is off to go fillet some lobbyists. This has been Profiles in Cowardice.
Welcome back to Chicago Independent Television. The Federal Communications Commission is crafting policy of freedom of speech and action on the internet, known as net neutrality. Chicago played host to a recent series of lectures on the topic. We'll now see the first of these series of lectures as an extended segment.
What does the term network neutrality mean? A good definition is posted on the website of the man who first coined the term net neutrality, Tim Wu, a law professor at Columbia Law School in New York. Let me quote at length from a page at timwu.org, which is devoted to defining the term. Tim Wu writes, quote, "Network neutrality is best defined as a network design principle. The idea is that a maximally useful public information network aspires to treat all content, sites, and platforms equally. This allows the network to carry every form of information and support every kind of application. The principle suggests that information networks are often more valuable when they are less specialized, when they are a platform for multiple uses, present and future. Note that this doesn't suggest every network has to be neutral to be useful. Discriminatory private networks can be extremely useful for other purposes. What the principle suggests is that there is such a thing as a neutral public network, which has a particular value that depends on its neutral nature. A useful way to understand this principle is to look at other networks, like the electric grid, which are implicitly built on a neutrality theory. The general purpose and neutral nature of the electric grid is one of the things that make it extremely useful. The electric grid does not care if you plug in a toaster, an iron, or a computer. Consequently, it has survived and supported giant waves of innovation in the appliance market. The electric grid that worked for the radios of the 1930s works for the flat-screen TVs of today. For that reason, the electric grid is a model of a neutral, innovation-driving network. The theory behind the network neutrality principle, which the internet sometimes gets close to, is that a neutral network should be expected to deliver the most to a nation and the world economically by serving as an innovation platform, and socially by facilitating the widest variety of interactions between people. The internet isn't perfect, but it aspires for neutrality in its original design. Its decentralized and mostly neutral nature may account for its success as an economic engine and as a source for folk culture, unquote. Sounds great, right? A maximally useful public information network that aspires to treat all content, sites, and platforms equally. Sounds like something everyone would support, right? So if everyone would support it then, and this brings us to our second question, why is net neutrality necessary? It's necessary because net neutrality, as great as it sounds, is not universally supported. There are powerful entities that want to undo this maximally useful public information network, to change it to something over which they can gain exclusive control and exclusive profit. These powerful entities, in particular, are large-scale telephone and cable television providers, which have had a history of vertical integration with internet service providers and consolidation among themselves, where buyouts, mergers, and attrition result in fewer and fewer providers holding more and more of the market. In the phone market of the United States, we are down, at the time of recording these lectures in June 2014, to just four major providers, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile, who combined command 90% of the telephony market in the United States. In the cable market in the United States, four firms, Comcast, Time Warner Cable, Cox, and Charter, combined to command 62% of the cable television industry's revenue. And that concentration is worse when you look at it from the perspective of individual consumers. I mentioned that there are a handful of cable TV and telephone companies holding most of the market share. But 20% of American households have just one internet service provider. And of the remaining 80%, more than 96% of those remaining 80% have at most two providers, a monopoly cable TV provider or a monopoly telephone provider. This concentration affects, or potentially affects, the internet and network neutrality in the following way. If an internet service provider in a more diverse market would not behave in a neutral fashion, that is, if an internet service provider would, for example, start to slow down or block outright unaffiliated content or access to content, unless folks paid more for that content, if that were to happen, then an unsatisfied consumer in a diverse market would simply switch to a different internet service provider that didn't behave so badly. But in a monopoly or in a duopoly, where parties behave like mobsters and make switching to another provider difficult or impossible, then the internet service provider has that leverage and can use it to fleece customers or degrade content or worse. Net neutrality, then, is a matter of bringing a measure of public accountability to these private shakedown artists. We, as a society, are largely unable or unwilling to take on these monopolies or duopolies. The concentrations of power and the expected consequences of markets, about which we will discuss in greater depth in a later lecture. But those private tyrannies are, in the case of the internet, nonetheless performing a public service. Historically, when that happens, when something private fulfills a public good, that falls under a practice and set of rules referred to as common carriage, with such parties being common carriers and net neutrality being an extension of that tradition of law and practice pertaining to the internet. There are and have been claims by some people, often officials who are affiliated with the Republican Party, who claim and have claimed that network neutrality is just additional bureaucratic red tape, a solution looking for a problem. For example, Federal Communications Commissioner Michael O'Reilly says that net neutrality in any form is, quote, unnecessary and defective, unquote, and doubts that, quote, there is an actual problem resulting in real harm to consumers, unquote. In actuality, there have been a number of cases of violations that can be construed as violations of neutrality on the internet, and that can illustrate specifically what could come to happen if net neutrality were to end. Before we dive into specific examples of network neutrality violations, it would be useful to note what forms such violations might take. Again, Tim Wu, the gentleman who coined the term network neutrality, offers a list of 4 potential violations of network neutrality, which we'll describe briefly. Violation number 1, blocking. Internet service providers simply block anyone or anything they don't like. Violation number 2, what's called termination monopoly pricing. Another way of saying that internet service providers can charge excessive fees to content producers or content consumers who wish to gain access to users. Violation number 3, what's called playing favorites, also called most favored network violations. This is where internet service providers don't block, but instead prioritize applications and content which they like, and deprioritize that which they don't. And violation number 4, transparency failures. This is when internet service providers don't say everything that they know to content providers and content to consumers, not just about the service options of what's available, but also about details of the state of the internet at any particular time. So, Commissioner O'Reilly says that net neutrality advocates fail to make the case that there's an actual problem resulting in real harm to consumers. It turns out that there are, already, on the record, instances of internet service providers who have already kicked the network neutrality hornet's nest in each of these 4 violation examples. Let's go through them again in turn. Violation number 1, blocking. There are a number of instances in which internet service providers have been caught blocking content. In 2007, Verizon declined a request from Narrow Pro-Choice America to carry text messages. And AT&T muted some politically charged lyrics during a live stream of the musical group Pearl Jam at Lollapalooza. In both instances, AT&T and Verizon backtracked on those actions and addressed concerns voiced by Pearl Jam and NARAL. But nevertheless, blocking did happen, and that highlights the very real concern of potential abuse should net neutrality be abolished. Violation number 2, termination monopoly pricing. In December 2013, Comcast began to throttle internet traffic generated by the streaming video service Netflix. Traffic improved after Netflix and Comcast in February 2014 agreed to a, quote, mutually beneficial interconnection agreement, unquote, even though, quote, terms of the agreement are not being disclosed, unquote. Indeed, there's a video segment on the HBO TV series Last Week Tonight with John Oliver where they track the throttling of traffic of that Netflix deal with Comcast and demonstrate the connection between the two. What's more, reports have since floated that a deal between Netflix and Verizon resulted in no noticeable speed improvement for Netflix customers using Verizon. Violation number 3, playing favorites. In 2007, Comcast was caught deprioritizing content that used the Internet Protocol BitTorrent, a set of digital rules, a protocol, that's particularly useful for transferring very large files across the Internet. BitTorrent is enormously popular and widely used. It accounts, by some estimates, for as much as a third of all Internet traffic. BitTorrent is widely used for movie and TV show sharing, what's sometimes called content piracy. And Comcast got caught in selectively interfering with BitTorrent downloads by Comcast customers. But Comcast was not caught by the FCC or by rival companies, but by investigators aligned with outsiders, most notably the nonprofit groups Public Knowledge and the Electronic Freedom Foundation. Comcast didn't make what they did readily apparent, which also makes it an example of violation number 4, transparency failures. The violation was discovered after the fact. Another example of such a transparency failure is the degrading or blocking of voice-over IP calls across mobile telephone networks. Such transparency failures are often explained away as measures to address security concerns. So we see a definition of what net neutrality is, we have a description of ways it's violated, and we have concrete examples of ways in which it has been violated. So let's assume the worst-case scenario. Suppose that the provisions regarding network neutrality on the Internet are abolished, and that the big Internet service providers, particularly the big phone and big cable TV companies, have free rein to carry out the violations we outlined. What then? What would the end result look like? What's most likely to happen? Internet service providers in the United States would now be able to legally block, gouge producers and consumers, play favorites, and not be transparent in revealing the details of their actions. Presumably, given the profile the issue has gotten, those Internet service providers would, as a concession, maintain a policy of neutrality, perhaps for a number of years, until the issue itself would presumably die down over time. Comcast, for example, has agreed to abide by net neutrality policies until 2018 as a concession to their buyout of NBC Universal. But after that, net neutrality, barring no other changes, will be formally ended. The policy fights will have been concluded, the policy will now be in place, the legal recourses in the courts will have been exhausted, and organized money will have defeated organized people regarding Internet policy with no going back. ISPs have ended their concession to abide by net neutrality, or they will have done so, and they will begin acting in their interests. They'll begin to increase their costs for usage and for providing content. And those costs are being applied more widely. Only the wealthiest producers can maintain their access to content, while users will have their content options reduced markedly. There are graphics online that envision what this would look like, taking the form of mock advertisements. For example, in one such mock ad from the fictional company Telco ADSL, you get starting Internet access at $29.95 per month, accompanied by the very legal small print known as mouse type, which says, includes 500 megabytes of free transfers to non-peering websites at full speed, limited to 120 kilobits per second thereafter. In other words, you can have access for a limited amount, and then the Internet would only be available at extremely slow speeds. The ad imagines a variety of optional tiers for things like international news, domestic news, music, online gaming, online retailers, and social networks. Each of these tiers carries an additional price of $5 to $10 per month. Mind you, by current Chicago standards, even these imagined inflated prices would be lower than what we currently pay. So let's increase the cost to, say, $200 per month for basic access with tiers at $25 to $50 per tier per month. Any sites or resources by activists, nonprofits, and small-scale companies, which are not in these commercially approved bundles, would be counted against your download quota, would be available but only at exceedingly slow speeds, or perhaps blocked entirely, and if there would be no way to address these problems. If this sounds eerily like the current arrangement of cable television, it's not a coincidence. Cable TV providers also rank among the major internet service providers. Telephone providers are also getting into the act with their own clones of cable television, like Verizon's Fios and AT&T's Uverse. What's more, with their bundles of cable television channels available in these subscription platforms, what you get now with cable television eerily resembles what is envisioned with the internet later, if net neutrality is abolished. There are serious policy reasons why now we are in a now or never situation regarding the internet. These are tied into the history of the internet, with key implications to future policy and future crafting of how the internet works. We'll explore that history and how it ties into a key FCC vote in 2014 in our next lecture. Thank you. Thank you.
This is Jeremy Scahill, and you're watching Chicago Independent Television.
Hi, I'm AJ Signeri from the Out Front Show on Q4 Community Radio, your source for activism in the arts. Listen to us at QUE4.org and on 1680 AM at select locations throughout Chicago.
Make ChicagoActivism.org your homepage, all the news, events, and contacts for activism in Chicago. The Chicago Activism News aggregates content from over 100 activist organizations from around Chicago and Illinois. There's also a search bar along the top if you want to search the web using Google, making it convenient to have ChicagoActivism.org your homepage.